Okay.
Jan, are you with us?
I'm here.
You are here. Well, welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. It is a pleasure to have you. And we are live, by the way. I should probably tell you that. But thank you for taking time out to be with us tonight.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, great. So am I. Now, I guess a good place to start is some background. How you went from the things you used to do to the things you do now. What got you so interested in this topic of the afterlife outside of the fact that we're all going to get there at some point?
Well, it's a long story, but I'll start, and I think it's an interesting story, and I'm sure your listeners would like to hear it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When I was in college, which was back a long time ago, as a student, I was a science student majoring in physics. And as a scientist, you sort of see all the beautiful laws of the universe, but in the meantime you say, is there something else? Because most scientists, unfortunately, take the attitude that once you're dead, and that's it, there's nothing else. And I just couldn't accept that. So as a science student, I started thinking about that. But there weren't many books available back in the 60s. So in 1969, I ended up going to South Africa. Before that, I was a student at Cornell University I did my master's at Cornell. I went to South Africa to do my PhD in physics on diamonds, the right place to go for diamonds. While there, this was around 1970, I met my wife, or future wife, and after met her, after 3 months we were married. Chose you, and then we're still married 45 years later, so it does occasionally work out. But she was also very interested in, hey, what happens when we die? So we ended up going to a few spiritualist churches. Now, South Africa is very much like England, where you have a lot of spiritualist churches. In this country, in the U.S., you don't have too many of them. But there, in this South Africa, there were. So we used to go on a Sunday night, used to go to a spiritualist church, and see if we could get any messages or get any information that might show us that there is something beyond life. If there is there something after death?
Oh no, go ahead.
Oh yeah, it's a long story.
Oh, please go.
But yeah, it gets more interesting. So we did that, and while there, we met some younger people, also our age. We were in our mid-20s, and we decided to form what's called a circle, what's called a development circle. And this is where we had a group of about eight younger people, and we'd meet once a week, same time every night, same time once a week, and we would see if somebody there might develop into a medium. Now remember, just for your listeners, a medium is an intermediary between the spirit world and the physical world. They sort of are a communicating agent between our world and the spirit world, and they get messages. So we went there were mediums there, and we thought maybe we could get some messages from the mediums or get some insight into if something was there. And we decided in our development circle to see if someone could develop into a medium. So we sat for several months, and one of the sitters sort of developed into a trance medium. I said sort of. And to explain to your listeners, a trance medium is a medium who goes into trance or becomes unconscious, and the spirits speak through him or her, which is very different from most mediums that people are familiar with, who are called channelers or psychics. People like Van Prague or John Edward or the Long Island medium. These are people who are fully conscious and just sort of get impressions or see visions and just tell you what the messages they get from the spirit world, and they tell the person they're giving the message to. Those are more channelers, they're awake, very different from a trance medium who is sort of like unconscious, and the spirits speak through them. So after a few months, we had one person developing into a trance medium, but it was very slow. Then one day, my wife and I decided, and now it starts getting interesting, we needed some furniture for our apartment. So across from the university where I was doing my degree was a little pine wood shop where they sold pine furniture. So we went there, we looked around, and we decided on a table with some chairs, and I sat down, and I said to the lady in the shop, I said, boy, these chairs are hard. They'll surely keep us awake in our circles, our development circles where we sat. And she said, oh, she said, you sit in a circle. And there I thought I was a big shot. I said, oh yeah, we sit once a week in a development circle, and we're trying to develop somebody into a medium. So she said, oh, she said, would you like to come to one of our circles? And my wife and I looked and said, oh, this is getting interesting. So we said to her, of course, we'd love to. She said, okay, next week, Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, this is where we live. Her name was Sarah, and her husband's name was Mickey. So next week, we go there Wednesday night, promptly get there early. We meet them, and there were two other people there. There was a professor of anatomy at the university, Jack Allen, and his wife. Because they'd invited Jack, because they knew that I was studying at the university to do my PhD. So they invited Jack and his wife and two other people. So at 8 o'clock, we went into a room, and it was totally blacked out. There was one window totally blacked out. In the corner, there were two chairs, and there was a black curtain that could be pulled across the corner. So you could only have the two people would sit there in the chair, and you could cover them with a black curtain, which was about 5 feet in front of where they were sitting, a few feet in front of where they were sitting. So we sat around in a semicircle. The door was locked. There was no light anywhere except for a red light bulb, which was turned off. So we were in total darkness. But there was what's called a trumpet. Now, a trumpet is like a megaphone. These girls, these cheerleaders at the basketball games or football games have these big megaphones they speak through.
Yeah.
Well, this is sort of a trumpet that was like 1.5 feet high, which had luminous paint at the bottom and luminous paint at the top. And this was standing about 2 feet in front of the curtain, which was now pulled in front of Mickey and Sarah, who sat in the chairs behind the curtain. So they sat behind the curtain was closed. This trumpet, or this sort of megaphone, sat on the floor in front of them, in front of the curtain, and the six of us sat in a semicircle just a few feet away from this where they were sitting in the corner. After about 2 or 3 minutes, a voice started speaking, a young voice, a male voice, and he sounded, believe it or not, with an American accent. And he spoke not from sort of behind the curtain, but to the side of the curtain and quite high up. And I'll explain later exactly what that is called.
Okay.
And the voice called himself Brian, and he started speaking to the two regular people. Then he spoke to Professor Allen and his wife, and he welcomed them because they were also regulars. And he spoke to us and welcomed us, and he hoped that we would enjoy the sitting and would experience something different. So we chatted for a while. Then he said, okay, let me go. And as soon as he left, about 10 or 15 seconds later, this trumpet or megaphone started moving up and started moving around the room. Now it's totally dark. You of course could see it because it had luminous paint on it. It started moving up to the ceilings, to the corners, came down, would tap you on the head, on the knee, never bumped into anything, and would fly around. Now, of course, my first reaction was, nonsense. This must be Mickey. He got up, and he probably had the thing on a string and was flying it around, but there was no buzzing noise of a string, and the thing was flying very differently. It was flying like a bee all around, very fast, rapidly, and like I said, never bumped into anything in the dark. And eventually it stopped about 6 feet high in front of the sitters, and a voice started speaking through it, a woman's voice in a German accent. And she introduced herself as Maggie, and she started talking to us. And she talked about purpose of life, and I can't even remember what she talked about. We were just stunned, my wife and I. And she spoke for a while, and a trumpet would fly, would eventually come down, again would position itself right in front. And after that, Brian came back, and he spoke to us, and my wife and I still don't remember, you really don't remember much, except Brian came, other people spoke, and we were stunned. After about an hour, the sitting ended, and I went up afterwards to Professor Allen. I said, John, or his name was Jack, like Jack, he called himself Jack. I said, Jack, is this for real? He says, absolutely. He has sat with Mickey and Sarah for years. He said, this is genuine, this is not phony, not fraud, this is real. Now, it turns out my wife and I, Marlene, we became very friendly with Mickey and Sarah. For the next 8 years, we sat with them regularly. In the beginning, every few weeks, later on, every month, and every few months. When they got older, they got into the late 60s. And then eventually we left South Africa to come back to the U.S. That's how my introduction to psychic phenomena, and these are called physical phenomena. These are called, Mickey and Sarah are called physical mediums. Very different from a trance medium or a channeler or a psychic.
No.
They are physical mediums.
No.
They produce these physical phenomena where objects fly around the room, where voices come from different places in the room, using what's called a voice box. They also produce what's called materializations, which I'll get into in a lot more detail. Or they produce apports. These are very rare. Physical mediums probably represent less than 1/100% of the mediums that exist. Anybody who's had the luck to have sat with a physical medium will have experienced something unbelievable. It is still possible today. There are still some physical mediums, but you can probably count them on 2 or 4 hands, and that's about it. They still exist, but to experience that is a life-changing experience. So that's how my wife and I got interested in this. That's how we experienced these phenomena, and from that stage on, I went even deeper into it. We had additional sittings, which I can describe in detail, but that's how we started. And I don't know if you want to stop here for a minute, because I can get into materializations and other direct voice and other phenomena. You might want to ask some questions, or...
Yeah, I did have a question, but you kind of answered it as you went along, and that was going to be about the physical medium. Now, I've not heard of a physical medium before. It's I thought, a medium was a medium, I guess, or psychic, rather.
Yeah.
I thought it was all the same, but it's not, huh?
Not at all. The typical medium is the ones you see on TV, the John Edwards, the James von Prague's, the Sylvia Browns, the Long Island medium. These are psychics. Some of them are very good. They give messages, but they're fully conscious, and they just give messages to the person they're giving a message to. Physical mediums produce physical phenomena. This is where you get, in the dark, these trumpets flying, where you get materializations, which I can go into some more detail now. That these kind of experiences are totally different, and they're so rare. But I address it in my book. I discuss the best physical mediums. And they basically, all of this started, well, I shouldn't say started, but became better known in the mid-1980s. 1850s, my apology. 1850s, sort of the birth of spiritualism in England and here in the U.S. And when there were more of these physical mediums. Of course, there are a lot of fraudulent ones, and they were exposed, rightfully so. But remember, there's fraud in everything. Even with regular psychics, they're good ones and they're bad ones, and they're fraudulent ones. I mean, it happens everywhere. But when you find a genuine physical medium, and they have been documented, back in the 1850s, someone called Hume, a physical medium who was investigated by numerous people. It was proven beyond any doubt he was genuine. And some of the people who investigated these mediums in those days were very famous scientists or even Nobel Prize winners, because they were interested in the same thing as a scientist, interested in, is there something beyond the laws of physics? Is there something after death? So these people were investigated, these physical mediums. And during the sort of 1850s and 1900, there were quite a few of them. But the more famous ones are in the early 1900s. And there are 2 of them I can really talk about because they have just been phenomenal. And the reason I know so much about them is that Mickey and Sarah, the people that we sat with, the mediums we sat with for 8 years, and by the way, the 8 years we sat with them, every time we sat with them, without any doubt, that trumpet, or that megaphone, would rise up and fly around the room. Every single time. Brian would come and talk to us every single time.
So
same voice, never changed.
You would see this with your own eyes.
This is our own eye. Now remember, this was in the dark. These trumpets fly around in the dark, but you can see them because of the luminous paint on these trumpets. Now there are magicians. There's a very famous book about it, and I just forgot the name of the book. There's a magician who claimed, oh yeah, all these trumpets are just phony. The medium would just have a stick with a string, and he would just take this trumpet, and he would just fly it around the room. And my very simple answer to that is, there are two answers. How come this medium, how come this trumpet can be flying around the room, touching people gently on the head, on the knee, and never bump into anything? If it was the medium there sitting with a rod and a string and flying the thing around the room, he would fly into things because he couldn't see. It was pitch dark. Also, these trumpets flew into the corners, near the ground, everywhere, just like a bee did. Also, the second thing is, these trumpets would just stop in midair, horizontally. Now, if you have something tied to a string, it's a bit difficult to stop it in midair horizontally, and then have somebody speak to it in a different voice, different accent from the medium. So, there are magicians who claim that they can do it, and I'll explain to you later. I once had a run-in with the famous magician Randy, and I challenged him, and he backed down as soon as I challenged him because he knew he couldn't do it. But I can get into that later. So these trumpets flying, yes, with my own eyes, Professor Allen, and all the people who've come to these sittings with Mickey and Sarah every single time. There were even times where Professor Allen and I would sit on both sides of the curtain and stick our legs out to see if we could, maybe Mickey was walking around just as a check. Nope, never, ever did anybody hit our legs. So, yes, it's genuine. Now, the more interesting thing of physical phenomena comes with called ectoplasm. Had you heard about ectoplasm, Michael, or should I explain it to the listeners?
Yes, please, because I heard a little bit about it on one of the videos of yours that I was watching, and I certainly want to hear a lot more about it. And I did want to mention quickly, I had read an article a few nights ago where scientists have now, they've all agreed, I guess, or at least a good portion of them, that there's this thing called the Force, like you would see on Star Wars, only real. I mean, there's this force, this unseen force that, goes against all physics. And so they're starting to understand that at least exists.
There are other things, yes, and we don't even know what they are. They call it dark energy, dark matter. But dark energy is something that pushes the universe to expand, but no one knows where it is, what it is. They just gave it the name of dark energy. So there are forces there and things happening that we just don't know about. For any physicist to say, we know everything, is nonsense. I'll give you an example. Back in the year 1900, most physicists agreed we know all the laws of physics. We know all the laws of nature. Nothing else is to be discovered. From then onwards, all the quantum mechanics laws, everything was discovered. So for them now to say all this psychic stuff is nonsense, they don't agree with the laws of physics, like this trumpet getting up and flying around, my answer is there are laws of physics we just haven't discovered yet. And this is where we get into ectoplasm. Now, ectoplasm is what is used to move the trumpet. And ectoplasm, a lot of people might say, they got to see it to believe it. So did my wife and I, and we ended up seeing it. But what ectoplasm is, it was called, given the name ectoplasm by Professor Charles Richet back in 1905. He actually won the Nobel Prize. He was a French scientist, biochemist. He won the Nobel Prize for biochemistry, and he called ectoplasm exteriorized substance because it comes from the medium. It comes from the mouth, from the nose, from the ears. It is a sort of colorless, cloudy, white fluid that comes from the mouth, from the medium. And it then forms, and it actually then attaches itself to the trumpet. Now, in my book, I got about 3 or 4 photographs showing exactly the ectoplasm coming from the medium, forming next to the medium, or forming over the medium, and then forming and attaching itself to the trumpet, picking up the trumpet, and making the trumpet fly. That is how the trumpet flies. It doesn't fly by itself. there is something there, but it comes from the medium.
Would that be similar to like what holds all the planets? I mean,
no. Ectoplasm is something that comes from the medium. Ectoplasm actually consists of what our body consists of. It consists of cells of the body. It consists of nitrogen, oxygen. It was analyzed only twice that I know of and I've read of, because it is a very rare substance. It's very sensitive to light. And light can actually hurt the ectoplasm and in that way hurt the medium. And there are cases, which I'll describe later, where one medium actually died and one medium got severely injured when light was shown on the ectoplasm. So white light is not what you want to shine on ectoplasm. You want ectoplasm mainly in the dark or in red light. And the reason for red light is red light has a longer wavelength, lower frequency. So it's not as energetically, it has lower energy than white light. So red light, you can see ectoplasm with certain mediums. The current mediums in the world, and I will describe one case later in July. I had one out here in Johannesburg. I had one here in Los Angeles where we saw the ectoplasm in red light. But the ectoplasm that comes from the medium and then attaches itself to the trumpet. And that's how the trumpet flies around. But think about it, Michael. Somebody's got to direct that. That shows you an intelligence that is way beyond what we are capable of, or we understand. Because that trumpet flies in the dark, without touching anything, doesn't hit the ceiling, but it gets right to it, to the corners of the room, taps sitters on the knees, on the head, and that is directed from an intelligence, which very likely, I believe, takes over the subconscious of the medium and directs the ectoplasm, which is then still attached to the medium, but then makes it move around. By the way, my book, which I see is on your website.
Yes.
You have your website. You show it there on the left-hand side. There are photographs in there of that ectoplasm. And by the way, the photograph on the front cover is what they call a full materialization. That is when the ectoplasm comes from the medium and forms into a person. I know most of your listeners are going to say, baloney, they don't believe it, it's nonsense.
No, my listeners actually probably will believe this. There'll be a lot of people who might be tuning in for the first time saying, what the heck are they talking about? But go ahead.
Exactly. But there, on the front page of my cover of my book, that, by the way, I believe is the best photograph of a full materialization ever published. That photograph, by the way, was taken, and this is why I have so much confidence in it that it was genuine, because I wasn't at that sitting. It was Professor Allen. He took that photograph in the late 1960s. I only went to South Africa in 1969. He took this late 1960s. The medium's name, he didn't want to use the medium's name because the medium was high up in the business world, and he didn't want to get his name around in case people would say he's a nutcase, he does these things. But my dear friend, Professor Jack Allen, sat with this particular medium 5 times. They took these photographs in red light, and I have 4 of them in the book, in red light, taken with a professional photographer with ultraviolet film. They took these photographs, and they show first in the book, it shows the ectoplasm coming from the medium's nose and mouth and forming sort of a sheet over his body. Another one shows the ectoplasm forming next to his head, which is called a voice box. That's what these spirits use to speak through. They don't always speak through the medium because the ectoplasm is coming from his mouth, his nose, his ears, but they use that ectoplasmic voice box next to the medium that they speak through. And that's what Brian, in the sittings we had with Mickey and Sarah, he used to speak through a voice box most of the time. Occasionally through Sarah, but most of the time he spoke through that voice box. But getting back to what that ectoplasm does, it forms on the ground and then rises and forms a person. That person is draped in white because it's ectoplasm. So that person is formed in the white, and that person then walks around the room and talks and acts like a regular, normal person. But he's still attached to the medium. And the reason I say that is because you can see it on that photograph on my front cover. If you look at the bottom, there's the white ectoplasmic figure talking to one of the sitters. That's one of the women in the circle who was asked to come up, and she's holding his hand. And at the bottom there, next to her feet, you can see all this white ectoplasm still lying on the ground, and that actually then goes back towards the medium. Now, a lot of people will say, that's just the medium dressed up in a white gown. First of all, it's not just a white gown. Look at all the folds, everything. Imagine trying to put that on if you're a medium, trying to put that thing on with all the folds, everything, and to have that stuff dragged behind you, which is then attached to the medium, makes no sense.
It kind of reminded me of like snot. I mean, to see it coming out of the nose like that, that's almost like a mucus bubble to me.
It is. It isn't mucus, but it's mucus is part of the body, but this is like a liquid that comes from the body. And by the way, they've taken mediums and put them on a scale to weigh them. When the ectoplasm comes out, they have lost typically around 5 pounds. 5 pounds a medium would lose while the ectoplasm was out of his body.
No kidding.
Yeah. So this ectoplasmic form now, this person, would then go around and talk to people. And very often it would be a relative of one of the people sitting in the circle. Now, can you imagine if you are sitting there in red light, you see one of these entities rising from the ground, forming up into a materialization, they call it, and then you recognize it as being one of your relatives? Can you imagine? And it's happened over and over again. And it's incredibly well documented. If you know where to look, it is incredibly well documented from mediums that have never, ever been proven to be frauds. Only genuine.
Now, what about materializations that happen without a medium present? Like, I had my own case like that, and, I mean, how do they do it?
They're not materializations. Those are apparitions.
Ah, okay.
Apparitions typically are earthbound spirits. These are people who, when they die, who either didn't believe in an afterlife or are so attached to the material world, they don't want to leave. They don't want to go off to the spirit world. So they attach themselves to the earth plane. And they can occasionally, you can see their sort of spirit body, etheric body, whatever the name is, it's an apparition. That's why apparitions sometimes look very real, but only it's short term. But they are not attached to a medium. There's normally never a medium involved. And they are normally, like in a house, haunted homes, typically where these people might have lived, they might have died, and they attach themselves to the home, and people will occasionally see them. But here in a materialization, this materialization is genuine ectoplasm, which is tied to the medium. And these, by the way, these materializations are living entities. And the reason I say that is, one of the sitters in one of the circles with Professor Allen was a doctor. Professor Allen, so was Professor Allen. He was a professor of anatomy. And they would hold the pulse of the materialization, and they could feel a heartbeat. The materialization would just talk to them like a normal human being. And the photographs in my book show a few of these full materializations. I know it sounds weird. I know it sounds strange. I have personally seen ectoplasm pour during one of the sittings we had with Mickey and Sarah. It was a sitting where they invited one of their friends, Kitty and Max. Kitty was about 10 years older than Sarah, Mickey and Sarah, and she was a materialization medium. She had sat for 30 years. But she basically retired. She'd gotten to her late 60s, and she was a bit tired. But Mickey and Sarah said to her, please come, show Jan and Marlene what ectoplasm is all about. So she came one night, and she sat there next to Sarah in the cabinet. The curtains were opened. The red light was turned on. She was in trance, and we saw this ectoplasm pour from her nose. It would cover her body, just like some photographs in my book, cover the body, go to the ground, and then Sarah, who was in trance also at the same time, Sarah's control, I can't remember if it was Brian or someone else, said to one of the sitters, pick up the ectoplasm at the end and hold it up and pull it across the room. He pulled it held it about 6 feet high and pulled it about 6 to 8 feet across the room. And there you saw this whole sheet of ectoplasm from about 6 feet high down to the ground and attached to the nose of Kitty, the medium. Then the entity speaking through Sarah said to the person, let go, and he let go, and the ectoplasm fell to the ground and just disappeared right back into Kitty. It would just go back into her nose. My wife and I will swear to it. We were not hoaxed. We saw it right in front of us. I was sitting no more than, I would say, 5, 6 feet away at most.
Was there ever any video or anything like that taken of this, or just pictures?
No, we did. In those days, remember, this was back in the 1970s.
I see.
So it wasn't like nowadays where you can take your iPhone and take a video.
Right.
There is a famous medium in Seattle who was back in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, Keith Reinhardt, very famous materialization medium. He went to Japan once where they took a video of his full materializations. They videoed it, the whole thing. And this video, which some people have seen, and I actually spoke to some person in Seattle who's seen it, and who actually used to sit with Keith Reinhardt and who saw these materializations. But he said the current video, unfortunately, is with the Aquarian Society in Seattle, and they will not release it. They consider this so precious, they don't, they want to keep it. Anyway, the reason, nowadays, you would think it is so easy to do, with iPhones and everything. The trouble is, there are not that many materialization mediums around at the moment. There just aren't that many. The best known one, and someone who I've invited twice, who came to Los Angeles back in 2012 and last year, 2014, David Thompson. David Thompson does full materializations, and I can describe some of his sittings. But unfortunately, all of it is in the dark. So the materializations are not in red light, which is a pity, because otherwise we could have filmed it. Occasionally, David will permit, or his guides, I should say, the people who speak through him, called guides, they will let him, or let people photograph the ectoplasm coming from his nose and covering his body. And there are photographs, and I have some that exist, of David with a sheet of ectoplasm covering him. But that's all. They've never let them photograph a full materialization. It's just too risky.
Well, there's gotta be people around today that can do this, and there probably are people who don't even realize they're able to do this, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. But the trick is, nowadays, it's not like it was back in the late 1800s or early 1900s. And the reason is that they're just, in those days, let me put it this way. In those days, remember, there was no television. Back in the late 1880s, it was barely radio. In the early 1900s, no television, just radio. So for entertainment, people would go more to spiritualist churches, would go and sit in development circles to develop people into mediums. But nowadays, what do we have? Everybody is attached to their smartphone. They're attached to the internet. All they do is Twitter and do that. They haven't got time for anything else. Am I right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they sleep with their bloody iPhones next to their bed and wake up when the thing rings. I mean, it's absurdity. In other words, we don't nowadays have what we had in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where we had these development circles, where mediums would develop. And it takes time. At the moment, I'm sitting with a person who has been told by 3 different psychics, channelers, that he's a materialization medium. I've been sitting with him, and now with him and his wife, for 2 years. And we're getting a little bit of results, but no ectoplasm yet in red light. No trumpet movement yet. We're getting table movement, but it takes time. And the people haven't got the time nowadays. They're all too busy. Everybody's too busy nowadays.
Well, a question from our chat room. JH asked if these beings, when they come out as exoplasm or what have you, do they talk about the other side? Do they communicate?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The good example, first of all, if they are a relative, they will give their names, they will give pet names, they will give whatever information is necessary. But most of the time, the sitters would recognize the person immediately as a relative. Other materialization, like with David Thompson, he has a guide who would come, and I forgot his name for a second. He would come and talk, but you could ask him all the questions about the afterlife. And he would talk about exactly what you wanted to know. Now, I'm not saying that he's correct. I've heard different versions, but he talks about what they do, what happens when you die. So they talk about, yes, and they all come there with the sole purpose. They say, we are here to tell you that there is life after death. Do not fear it. Live your life as best as you can, because you're going to go to something afterwards, to a spirit world. And if you didn't have a good life, you're going to end up paying for it. So they tell people, and they talk about reincarnation, they talk about cause and effect, they talk about karma, they talk about anything you ask them, they will talk about. So, yes, you can ask them these questions, and they talk about it.
So then what does happen after we die? I mean, I've never envisioned it as split for, well, the good go here and the bad go there, but...
Oh, no. What happens is that the moment you die, your spirit body, call it your spirit body, separates from your physical body. And it takes the mind along. Remember, your brain is physical, but your mind is spiritual. So your spirit body leaves your physical body, and supposedly it's attached to your physical body, what's called a silver cord, but that's at death, that snaps, and you then go into the spirit world. For most people, there will be relatives there waiting for you to greet you and to take you to the spirit world. There you will go, and this is what they tell us, to the level where your spiritual evolution is the right place for you. In other words, someone like Hitler or Stalin, mass murderers, they will go together to the lowest levels of the spirit world. Call it whatever you want. They will go to the lowest levels, which is almost like, call it what you want, hell or whatever, a bad place where they are going to end up paying for what they did. But eventually, if they evolve, they will go higher. The average person will go to the average person who lives a decent life will go to a relatively average place where they will be there, and they will then, the purpose there is to, again, to evolve your spirit and your soul spiritually, to evolve it by doing good, by doing, like basically, like any of the religious leaders in the world tell us, live your life as well as you can, love your neighbor like yourself, do what you can to help others, and those people will evolve to higher and higher levels. So I agree with you, there's no such thing as heaven and hell. There are all these levels of where you will go to depending on how you lived your life on this world, on this earth plane.
I've kind of envisioned it a bit myself, is that if you're one of those people who have been, and I'll say this gently, brainwashed and believe that, you know, you've been bad and your soul's going to burn in hell, if you believe that, then you may actually create that when you go there, at least for a short time. So I think, I've always thought that we have to at least, and this is just my thoughts, I don't know, but that we would at least have to forgive ourselves before we could ever be forgiven from, you know, whatever's on the other side.
Oh, absolutely. And the whole purpose for a lot of the people, the spirits on the other side, is to help you, convince you that, you know, even if you are brainwashed, to help you, convince you that you are a good person, that you are, what you've done in your life is good. Absolutely. So these things are absolutely possible. And that's why there's so many earthbound spirits, people who don't believe that it could be anything like a spirit world. And to give you a funny example, not a funny example, a sad example, or whatever you want to look at it, is my father. My father was a total atheist. Didn't believe, he was a scientist like myself. Total atheist. Didn't believe in anything. He said, when you're dead, you're dead. My father had a heart operation back in around 1992. And after the operation, he was wheeled out of the operating theater, and apparently one of the stitches they put in his heart broke open, and he sort of went into cardiac arrest, and he sort of died there. So they had to wheel him right back into the operating room, open his chest again, get to his heart, and fix it. Apparently he was dead for a few minutes with no vital signs. This is what's called a near-death experience. And then he came to again, they saved him. Now, he told my sister, he never told me, because he knew I believed, in this whole spirit world, but he told my sister that while he was there, he floated through a white light, through a tunnel, and there he saw some people there. He didn't recognize them, but there were some people there. And they spoke to him and said, no, you have to go back. You can't stay here. It's not your time yet. You go back. So they told him that. And he ended up waking up and living another 2 years.
How horrible is that, though? You go in, you get a heart surgery, you get done, and then bam, something went wrong, and they have to get you right back in there. At that point, I'd be on the other side and say, do I have to go back? I mean, come on.
That's what he said. He liked it there. He told my sister he liked it there. It was beautiful. And they said, no, you got to go back. You're not finished yet. You haven't finished your life yet. So they sent him back. So these are near-death experiences. There are quite a few books on near-death experiences, and a lot of people have had them, and they're fascinating. But they just show another aspect of this thing, that something seems to govern your life, with your time here on Earth. Maybe there's something predestination. I've asked David Thompson's guide. I've asked him, William, his name is William. I've asked him, is there such a thing as predestination? And he basically said, you choose when you are born, and you basically choose very likely when you will die. But everything in between is partly chosen, partly how you live your life. So the sort of the beginning points and end points are fixed. But most of the things in between, there are lots of different roads from the beginning to the end. And how you live your life will determine how you go from A to B. So that's very interesting. But to come back to these materializations, that is their whole purpose. Their whole purpose is to come and, first of all, help those people who are bereaved. Very often they will have children come of parents who have lost a child, and the children will materialize. David Thompson had one case where a dog had died, and the person in the circle was mourning the loss of the dog, and then the dog materialized and ran across the room and jumped on the person's lap. A materialized dog.
See, I had a dog materialize to me when I was a kid too. He had got hit by a car, and the next day, I seen this white fuzzy cloud pass through my room, and it was the dog, and he went through the wall, and that was it. And at the time, I'm thinking, rubbing my eyes, thinking, did I really just see that? But I did.
You saw. I guarantee you saw it. That happens a lot. Those are after-death experiences where someone dies, and it's not ectoplasm, but again, like I said, an apparition, where it's their spirit form or their etheric body comes and shows themselves to their relatives. And that's exactly what your dog did, so it was genuine. He just came to show you that he was still alive in the spirit world. That's what happens. And it happens very often with people where a relative dies hundreds of miles away, and they're sleeping, and they would wake up, and all of a sudden at the end of their bed, they would see somebody and say, hey, wait a minute, you're supposed to be dead. And the person shows up, and the next day they find out the person died that evening. So it happens a lot. These are after-death experiences, where the person, after they die, show themselves in their spirit body to some of their relatives or friends. So it happens. But the whole purpose of these materializations is to show, first of all, to help the bereaved, explain to them there is life after death. Your loved one has not died. Well, they've died in the physical form, but they're still alive in the spirit world.
So some are allowed to come back after they've gone. So it's not like all of them are just sitting around because they didn't believe there was an afterlife or stuck or what have you, but that some of them actually come back because they have a purpose or a reason to do so.
Oh, absolutely. They come back, and they come back to their relatives to show themselves to their relatives and say, here I am. I'm alive. And the best example I can give, to take a few minutes, an interesting story.
Sure.
This is the medium Minnie Harrison. Minnie Harrison lived in England. She lived in England between, let me get the dates right, about 1897, and she died about 1958. And she and her family formed a circle in the late 1930s, early 1940s, and her son, Tom Harrison, who I've spoken to, who's now in the spirit world, but he wrote a book about his mother's mediumship, who was a materialization medium. And I have some photographs of Minnie Harrison in my book, and I have a whole chapter devoted to her. But they used to have a circle, just a closed circle with some friends, and every Saturday night they sat, and every Saturday night her relatives or other people would materialize, mainly her sisters who were dead. She came from a large family, would materialize and talk to all the people there. Tom once said that he got a letter from someone who'd heard about their circle, and he would love to come to their circle and experience this. So Tom thought, what the hell, might as well invite someone. So they invited this person, a stranger, and he came to their circle. No one knew who he was. He said nothing. He just gave his name. And in the circle, after Minnie's sisters had materialized, a woman all of a sudden materialized, and this was the wife of this man. His wife had died a few months ago, and she materialized. And he recognized her, and you could imagine he was in tears. And she even said, "Come on over, you can kiss me." And he gave her a kiss, and it was his wife. He said 100%. Now, no one there knew who he was. They had no idea. So fraud is totally ruled out. And here she came to show him that she was alive in the spirit world.
Well, you know how much that would help everybody. Now, I've had experiences, so you don't have to convince me. I know that these things happen. But for other people, like my father, for instance, when my mom passed away, I had a visitation from her, but he never did. And so, how good that would do for somebody like him, for her to come and say, "Hey, don't worry, I'm here, I'm waiting for you, blah, blah, blah." This is, but they don't do that with everybody. So, I think we might have a much more peaceful world if everybody knew for sure. And
Michael, I agree with you 100%. The trouble is, like I said, our world, our society nowadays is too busy with everything material. We're too busy with these things. We don't have development circles anymore where we develop mediums. There are so few materialization mediums. Just to give you an example, this David Thompson, who I've invited, he lives in Australia. He's a medium. He's been a physical medium, materialization medium since the early 2003, 2004. I invited him in 2012 to come here. And David came, and we had a circle sitting. We had about 30 sitters, 30 people who were invited. They had to pay, of course, because he does this, to make a living. That's all he does. So they had to pay. And David, to give you an example, to the extreme caution we go in these sittings, he was tied to the chair. His arms were tied to the armrests on the chair. His legs were tied to the feet of the chair. A gag was put through his mouth and tied behind him so he couldn't talk. So he was totally secure to the chair. Okay? He sits in a little cabinet, or we sat in this case in the corner of a room with a black curtain in front of it, just like Mickey and Sarah did. And after a few minutes, this wilderness guide would come out. Well, you couldn't see it, of course, because it was dark. And he would walk around the room and talk. Now, this entity would walk around, come to different people, put his hand, which is a very big hand, on the people's head, on their heads, and he would talk to them, and he would answer questions. And you could hear him because we put some wood on the floor, so you could hear him stomp on the wood flooring. David was wearing sneakers, and this guy was wearing boots. You could hear the boots. Now, this is a full materialization. A big guy, you could hear it, and his hands were big. David's hands were small. So he would walk around, touch people, and answer questions. Afterwards, he would disappear, and little Timmy would come, and he would talk, and the trumpet would fly around the room. And I'd actually brought one of my own trumpets, which we had in the days of Mickey and Sarah, and the two trumpets were flying around the room, just like we saw in South Africa, going up to the ceilings, to the corners, tapping people, and we saw them, of course, because of the luminous paint on them. Remember, with David, everything is in the dark. And then we had other people materialize. One person who materialized was Louis Armstrong. Now, a lot of people say, oh, baloney. Well, he sang a bloody good Hello, Dolly, just in a very rustic voice that Louis Armstrong had. And he played his harmonica. He was given an harmonica by the person who helped David. He was given a harmonica. He played the harmonica. And now, if it was Louis Armstrong or not, I don't know. But boy, it sure as hell sounded like him, and somebody was playing the harmonica. Now, this went on for 2 hours. Objects flying around the room, people coming out, materializations, touching people, everything. Afterwards, there were still people who said it was total fraud. People who said, oh yes, David undid himself from the chair. Now, he was tied with these plastic tree ties. Remember, these tree ties, these plastic things?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he undid himself. He got out, and he did all this. And I'm thinking, well, how did he do it, I asked him. Oh, he had night vision goggles. I said, oh? Yeah, with the night vision goggles, he went around, moved the trumpet, and he went around, talked to people. I said, but all these voices were different. Oh, he just impersonated all these people. And I'm sitting here thinking, give me a break. And then, he went back, and he had tied himself back in the chair. Now, first of all, these tree ties, when we turned the red light on afterwards, after 2 hours, there he was still sitting in the chair, totally tied, no indication of any broken tree ties or anything. These things, the only way you can get out of them is to cut them open. I'm sure as you know.
Sure.
The only way you can get out of them is to cut them open. So, for anybody to say it was him, the thing was tied around his mouth to his back. His legs were tied. It's just unbelievable, but people, they can't believe it, so they say it must be fraud.
Well,
by the way, he was searched. The room was searched. There were no evidence of physical goggles, nothing. I sat right next to the cabinet. I felt the big hands of the William that came out. David had very small hands. It was totally no evidence of fraud possible, but people would still, there were 4 or 5 people, it has to be fraud. It can't be true.
You could spray people with a hose, some people, and they'd still insist that there's no such thing as water.
Yeah. Michael, you're so right. I was stunned. They wanted their money back. They said this was fraud. I said, no way you're getting money back. And I said it was genuine. I said, I have sat for years. And by the way, the ceiling was 9 feet high. David is like 5'7". I mean, how does he get the trumpet up to the ceilings in the corner of the room without bumping into anything? Anyway, it is mind-blowing how people can say these things. They won't, if they can't believe it, they won't accept it. Like you said, you can, no matter what you do, there are going to be these kind of people. And this is why when you say, if we can just convince the world, there are so many people who think it's not possible. They've convinced themselves there's no life after death, or none of this is possible.
You're right. There are people who, if they had a visitation right now, if ghosts, they've seen an apparition in their room, they would instead of saying, hey, I had an apparition, they would contact me and say the government's putting holograms in my room. I mean, which could be possible. Like that, yeah. Or
something absurd. It is just mind-blowing. And here we have the fundamental truth of life on Earth. What is the purpose of living here? Is the purpose of living here to sit and talk on your smartphone all day and text all day and tweet all day and make as much money as you can? No, that's not the purpose of life. There is more to it.
Yeah.
Look, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but there's more to life. Give life its priorities.
I haven't had a cell phone since 2010. October 2010, I gave it to my daughter, which is now in the garbage, but I gave it to her, and I've never got a new one.
Well, Michael, you and me and my wife are very similar. We have a normal, regular cell phone in case, you travel, you need an emergency, you need the phone. We don't have any of these smart iPhones. And my son and my daughter, I say to them, if you want to talk to me, you phone me and you talk to me. I don't want to get any tweets or text or something. Talk to me.
Right.
That's the only way to do it. I mean, what is this nonsense that everybody tweets and texts each other? Give me a break. They can't even spell anymore. They can't even hold a conversation. Keep priorities of life in the right place. The purpose we are here for is to develop ourselves spiritually, is to be kind to others, to help others. There's nothing wrong with making money as long as you use it for a good purpose. There's nothing wrong with a smartphone, but it's not the most important thing in your life.
That's right.
Anyway, but there's some other stories I'd love to tell you.
Sure, we've got to hit a break here first, so why don't we do that? We'll take the break, and then we'll come back.
Zamet, VictorZamet.com, I think it is. His website, talk about him in my book. I know Victor very well. We've met, we've talked, we've both about the same age, and we've experienced the same physical phenomena. That's the best place to go to learn a bit. The rest is to read. And like I said, read my book. I don't want to try to sell my book. Believe me, I make all of $1.60 on a book I sell.
Well, of course, you'd still like to sell them. I mean, you deserve it. You've put the work in, so.
Yeah, but there I give a lot of references to other books. The best thing is to read and see the photographs for yourself. This way you'll learn about it. And that's the only way to do it, is to learn. And once you've read my book, read a few other people's books, go to Victor's website, read Victor's book, you'll know a lot more about the subject, and you realize what is real, what isn't real, and what really happens. It is so exciting. For anybody interested in this, I highly recommend it. Both Victor's book, my book, and then go and read some of the other books I refer to. Tom Harrison's book. There's some tremendous books to read. I know this is not like, quickly going onto a YouTube. Brother, I have a YouTube video, which is actually an interview I did back in 2008. But that's what I recommend. And just to give your listeners an idea, I'm not a crank, as I think you know, Michael.
Right.
I have a PhD in physics. I was a professor at Cornell University. I was a scientist at the Jet Propulsion Lab, a division of NASA. I was a business executive in the business world, president of and CEO of a public company, and I wrote my book when I retired. And the reason I waited that long was because people ridiculed you when you talked about it. Especially when I was at Cornell University as a professor. You would talk to other scientists about it, and they would poo-poo you and say, there's no such thing as an afterlife. Nonsense. There's no spirit world. Nonsense. The laws of physics tell us there can't be. And I say to them, but we don't know all the laws of physics. We don't understand all the laws of physics. And they sort of poo-poo you. And during that time, we had a visitor at Cornell, the magician calling himself Randy. I don't know if he still comes on TV. He's a big debunker. He's made a fortune debunking psychics.
Yeah,
that's what he does. He's made a fortune doing it. And I met with him personally. I showed him some of the photographs that I have in my book. And this was just me and him. And I said, look, these photographs were taken by Professor Jack Allen. I know where they were taken, who took them, of full materializations and ectoplasm. He says, oh, I can do that. I said, okay, we'll tie you to a chair in the dark, in a room that we choose, and you produce it. And I'll give you $10,000 right now if you can do that. And if you can't, you give me $10,000. He never accepted it. And you know why? Because he can't do it. There is no way. You see, these magicians, they can only do things if they can prepare themselves in their little setting, and they still couldn't produce ectoplasm or trumpets flying like we've seen, or full materializations. But he makes his life debunking. So he will never accept a challenge, even though he says, oh, I can do that. So that's just an example of, don't listen to these magicians who tell you, oh, it's all nonsense. They think that they're God's gift to whatever it is. They're not. They cannot produce what I'm talking about today with the photographs in my book. They cannot do that. They cannot do what a David Thompson does, tied to a chair with his arms bound to the chair, his legs bound to the chair. And you can't do it, not in the pitch dark.
Now, I have to ask this. How come it's always in the dark, though? Because
that's
people are going to
because the ectoplasm is sensitive to white light.
Ah, that's right. You did explain
That's the reason.
Okay.
And to see the most famous medium that I consider the most famous medium is Alec Harris. Alec was born in 1897 in Wales, and he very begrudgingly became a medium. His wife took him along to a spiritualist church where he didn't really want to go to, but he was told, no, he's going to be a medium. He said, yeah, sure. And eventually he and his wife used to sit, like development sitting, and he became a medium. And he became a materialization medium. Now listen to this. He's the most incredible materialization medium. He would, once he was developed, which took a few years, during an evening of sitting, and he did this in red light. In red light, he would produce anywhere from 20 to 30 different materializations in an evening. All at different times, not at the same time, but one after the other. One would come out from behind the curtain, the black curtain. It would very likely be one of the relatives of one of the people there. 30 or 40 people would be there. And there would be a reunion, messages. Other times it would be children, it would be other people. It was always somebody. He did this 20 to 30 different materializations per night in red light. Can you believe that?
That's a lot. Now
that is stunning. And the reason I know this, and this is where the story gets interesting. He and his wife had a son who moved to South Africa, to Johannesburg. There, they decided to go move there to live close near their son. So they moved to Johannesburg. There, they met the people we ended up sitting with, Mickey and Sarah. So Mickey and Sarah ended up sitting with Alec Harris. And they told us these stories about Alec. So I know, even though I've read about it, when you hear it from first hand from people you 100% trust, it is a totally different ballgame. One of the stories they told us, this is just phenomenal, one of the materializations that came was a Native American, and he was Mickey's guide. And he said, Mickey, come to me. So Mickey came over and stood in front of him. Now you have this big Native American Indian with feathers, and he said, Mickey, hit me on my chest. Mickey, now this is ectoplasm where you could hurt the medium if you touch the ectoplasm or do something you shouldn't do to the ectoplasm. He says, don't worry, hit me. So Mickey gently nudged him. He says, Mickey, hit me. So he tapped him. He said, Mickey, hit me. So Mickey took his fist and hit him as hard as he could, and bang, it was solid as a rock. He says, Jan, he told me, I hit him, and he didn't budge. And there he was, a full ectoplasm materialization, standing there talking to me, and I hit him, and nothing happened. But he was allowed to. If you do it unexpectedly, that's a different story. Now what happens next is even more astonishing. Most of these entities would walk back behind the curtain, and then somebody else would come out a minute or two later. This one, Mickey said, started disappearing into the floor, started sinking into the floor, while he's talking to Mickey. So he's sinking into the floor, and then his legs disappear, and he gets, he's down about 3 feet high now. His head's still there. He keeps on sinking in. By the way, that ectoplasm is all going back into the medium, behind the curtain. Then at the end, only his head is still sticking out, and he's still talking to him. and then the head sinks into the floor and disappears. Now, this I know because Mickey and Sarah told me this, and I trust them 100%. Like I said, we became incredibly good friends. We sat for 8 years. That's what they told us about Alec Harris. But what happened to Alec Harris, and it shows you the danger of what happens with ectoplasm, one of the sittings with Alec Harris in 1961, Alec Harris's sitting, they used to be very careful who they invited, because the press had heard about him, and they thought he was a charlatan, a fraud, and they wanted to expose him. So they were very careful in who they invited. So they would invite typically 20, 25 people for a sitting, and in one of their sittings, two of the sitters ended up giving their tickets, because you had to have a ticket, and no, it was very carefully controlled. They gave it to two people who claimed they were interested. They turned out to be newspapermen.
Ah.
These two newspapermen got into the sitting. When one of these materializations was walking around and talking to people, one of these newspapermen jumped on the materialization, jumped on it, thinking it was the medium dressed up, with a white robe or something. He jumped on it and fell right to the floor. The ectoplasm shot back into Alec Harris, into his stomach, and he was badly injured. They had to take him to hospital, and he was never the same again. All because of the idiocy of a newspaperman who tried to prove he was a fraud, which he clearly wasn't, but he injured him so badly that Alec Harris could never produce full materializations. He could produce partial materializations, heads, arms, but never full materializations like he used to.
Now that's a case I'd love to watch on Judge Judy. I wonder how she would handle that one.
That guy deserved to go to jail and to hell. Sorry using the expression.
No, it's quite
but that is where this man did so much good. He reunited so many people with their loved ones who died, and shown to people that there is no such thing as death, terminal death. There is life after death. And this is what they do to him. This is what these non-believers, these people who says it can't be true, it's nonsense, materializations can't exist. Well, I've been involved with it for so many years that you know it is genuine, you know it is true, and it's just these people who they think they can expose, like all these magicians. They can't imagine anybody being better than them and producing the genuine thing and not being some phony like a magician is. It is so sad. Let me tell you something else, Mickey and Sarah, some of the sittings we had.
Sure.
We had what's called Christmas sittings with them. This was every Christmas. There were about 10 people invited, besides Mickey and Sarah. Everybody had to bring a present, wrapped. And at 8 o'clock, we'd walk into the room, and all these presents were put in front of the cabinet, in front of the black curtains where the trumpet was. Also on the floor were little toys. There was a little toy drum, a toy whistle, a toy trumpet, a toy, one of these mechanized friction toys that gave off sparks and you could, buzz around. The old days, these friction toys.
Yeah.
And they were also there amongst the toys, amongst the presents. And the circle started, as usual, with Brian, Sarah's guide, speaking through a voice box. You could hear it next to even though you couldn't see it because it was dark, you could hear it next to the curtain. And he would go around saying hello to everybody and welcoming them. And he got to my wife, and he said, "Hello, Marlene." He said, "Hello, Brian," because we knew Brian well. We've been sitting with them, for many times. And he said, "Marlene, thank you for the gift." Now, of course, the gift was wrapped in a box. Marlene never told Sarah what was in the box. And Brian says to my wife, Marlene, says, "Oh, by the way, Marlene, you're going to have one of those next year." Now, this is December. He says, "You're going to have one of these next year, but it's not going to be that color." She had bought a black doll that was wrapped up in the box. So, black baby. So he said to her, "You're going to have one of those next year, but it won't be that color." We had our daughter next November, 11 months later. So he told her. He knew in advance, and he knew what was in the box.
And there's definitely real psychics. I mean, I've had through the years doing this show, I've had many psychics on this show, and I didn't believe in all of them. I mean, some are just really good at making themselves look like they know what they're talking about, but then there's those who really stand out. And I've had a few in my years that I would go off and put it all on the line and say they're absolutely real.
I agree with you. There are genuine ones, and I'll give you some examples later. But let me continue this thing about these Christmas sittings. So after Brian goes around and talks to everybody, all of a sudden, we hear all this noise. We hear all these little musical instruments being played. All these toys, there's about 5 of them, all being played at the same time. The whistle, the drums, the trumpet, the friction toys, whatever they had there, it was all being played at the same time. All this racket going on for like 5 minutes. After that, we hear all these presents being unwrapped, being opened. All the wrapping paper was taken off all the presents. And then, after all that, we start feeling little hands come and pull us on our trousers or touch us on our hands. Little hands no more than 2 inches long, start pulling on my pants, touch Marlene's hand, put their hands in her hand. So you get all these little spirit children. What the purpose of the Christmas sitting was for spirit children to come and materialize, to unwrap presents, something they never had a chance for in the physical world because they died when they were young children, and play all these instruments and have fun. It was unbelievable.
Kids on the other
this kind of experience.
Kids on the other side kind of spook me out a little bit.
Well, I mean, there are people who die. There are kids who die when they're 3, 4, 5. They die.
But you know, there's also I don't know how else to put it except for to say naughty spirits that will, you know, pretend they're a child.
Michael, you're 100% correct. There are these mischievous, earthbound spirits. You're 100% correct. The whole key is that they're guides who protect this circle of Mickey and Sarah's. They keep those entities away. I agree with you. They exist. And for example, there are a lot of children or young teenagers who play the Ouija board, or even older people who play with the Ouija. You've heard of the Ouija board.
I sure have.
Now, the danger is that you pick up these earthbound lower-level entities, these mischievous entities who give phony messages, who do harmful messages, and it does a lot of damage. You're 100% correct. And people who play those things must be very, very careful. But here, in our circles with Mickey and Sarah, they keep those entities away. Their guides, the people who protect that circle, keep those. We've never had any evidence of any of that kind of things happening. These were genuinely little children who come and they played those instruments, they unwrapped the presents, and they came and touched everybody in the circle. So I believe that 100%. But you're right. You've got to be so careful when dealing.
Would you say there's a such thing as, I think there's good and bad in everything, but some people go as far as saying a demon. And I've had guests on the show who have undoubtedly been tormented to no can do by something, and they called it a demon. Now, where does that lie in?
Well, to me, that's semantics. A demon is just a bad entity, an evil entity, same thing. I mean, it's a person who's bad on this earth plane, who goes to the spirit world, who dies, goes to the spirit world, and he believes he's there. He doesn't believe in an afterlife, and he still believes he's here on this earth plane and terrorizes whatever he does. So there are no such things as demons or devils. They're just evil people, mischievous people, bad people who come to create harm.
So if somebody goes to the other side, I would suppose that they bring who they were or their personality traits with them. So at what point then would that change when they come back?
Well, that happens when eventually some of the spirit people on the other side help them and convince them that they are dead, that they are in a spirit world, and that they should stop doing what they're doing. It can take centuries. Remember, some of the hauntings in houses are houses that's been there for decades or for centuries. So some of these entities are very difficult to get away from their attachment to the earth plane. But that's what a lot of these spirit entities, they've told us, they try to do, is convince these people that they're dead and they must come to the light, or whatever they want to call it, and come and realize that there is something beyond what they're doing, something better in their spirit world. So you're right, they're there. We got to be very careful of them. Anybody who uses the Ouija board, I totally warn them, it's not a joke. You can get very bad messages.
You would think that there'd be some kind of authority on the other side that would say, all right, look, you've been hanging around this house for 25 years now. Enough's enough. Get home. You know?
Unfortunately, it's not that simple, from what we've heard, from what they tell us. It's not that simple. They have to convince them that they're dead, which a lot of them won't believe.
So then if I passed away, say tonight, and whether I believed or not, once I left my body, if I wanted to stick around in this house, I could do that?
You could do that if you wanted to, but you are aware that there's more to it. You are aware there's a spirit world, so you won't hang around.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to really hang around, because if I couldn't use any of my stuff here, what's the point?
Exactly, but people don't realize that. They just think they're there, and they live in the house, and they stay there, and it makes no sense, but they're attached to it. They know nothing better, but you know better, so you wouldn't. So you would just go on into the spirit world and evolve. So it's a tricky thing. That's why I warn people. You got to be so careful when dealing with the spirit world. It's not a joke, but it's real. And talking about psychics, like you said, you've had guests who are good psychics, and some are good, some are average, and some are very bad.
Yeah.
There are some very good ones. My experience, I've sat with a lot of, we call them channelers, psychics, clairvoyants, whatever you want to call them. I've had a lot of sittings. I would say that 75% of them gave messages that were not very meaningful, or not very good. I would say that only 5 or 10% of them gave superb messages. And one example which I want to give you, which also ties in with predestination, which we talked about earlier, I was a professor at Cornell, and after being there for several years, we decided to move to Chicago, where I was taking a job in the financial world, one of my other interests. And we'd gone to Chicago, we'd bought a house, we flew back into Ithaca, New York, where Cornell is. And when we got out of the airport, at the hotel, there was a big psychic fair. So I said to my wife, hey, let's go there and see if there are any good psychics. So we will go to the psychic fair, and I asked to speak to the organizer, and I asked him, who is your best medium? Who is your best psychic here? He says, oh, they're all good. I said, no. Who is your best psychic? And he looks around and he points at one particular lady. He says, she is. I said, thank you. So after she finished her sitting, we went to sit with her. And the first thing she says to us is, you're moving. Oops, okay. She says, you're moving to the Midwest. Oops, correct. Chicago is the Midwest. Then she said, oh, you want to take your second car. Don't take it. My wife and I have had an argument for weeks that we were going to drive in 2 cars to Chicago. My wife said, no, we'll go in 1 car, we'll sell the other car. And I said, no, we'll keep the second car. She said, go in 1 car, don't take 2 cars. Bang, just like that. So, okay, I sold the other car. And a day before we leave, the person who bought the car phoned and said, did you know there was something wrong with the car? I said, no, I did not, although it was like a $500 car, so it wasn't a big deal. But there was something major wrong with the car. Now, another thing then, she said, you're not going to be in the Midwest very long. You're not going to be there very long. She says, you're then going to move to the Southwest. Well, Los Angeles is the southwest of the country. That's where we live now. I said, can you see anything beyond that? She says, no. That's where you're going to be. We've been here 35 years.
That's
just like that. This is the best medium I've ever had a sitting with, and just accurate point after point after point. But they were predictions, which all came true.
Yeah, and in all the psychics that I've ever spoke with through the years, I don't recall any of them saying, "Hey, you better go get your arteries checked out. One of them's clogged." I did find out later, but it wasn't through no psychic.
It's rare. It is rare. But this one with the car, she was adamant. Don't take the other car. I mean, and then we asked her, what about the children? She says, no, they're going to be fine. Well, we've touched wood. We've had no trouble with our children. They're both successful kids, and now they're adults, of course. But that was the best sitting with a psychic I've ever had.
Now, what happens, do you think, and maybe you know this, maybe you've talked to somebody, but what happens to a psychic when they go to the other side? Are they, I mean, my God, I mean, now you're on the spiritual world, and I mean, but you've never really left it because you've been able to connect with it all along.
Exactly. They know exactly that they're there, and they know exactly what it's all about, and they will just go to whatever level their spiritual evolution will take them, depending on how good a person they were. You could be a psychic, but you can be addicted to drugs, booze, women, name it, whatever you are. It depends on how you live your life. Do you help others? Do you care for others? Most psychics, of course, do, the good ones. But still, are you self-obsessed? Do you only care about yourself? There's so many things in life that are important. The most important thing is not just yourself. Yes, you have to take care of yourself. You must do what you can. You're here. You have a body. You have to take care of it. Doesn't mean you have to want wealth and luxury. I don't think that's one of the purposes of life. There's nothing wrong with doing well, but if you're doing very well, give some to charity, help others as well.
I agree with that totally, and that's what we tell people. There's so many million and billionaires out there, and if you really want to help and do something good for people and support a network that brings you the truth, and so that's what I always say. But we got another question from the chat. Is a psychic allowed to tell a client they're going to die soon, and how? And I guess that would kind of determine whether the client says you can tell me anything or not.
Yeah.
Right?
I have never known, I've never read, I should say never. It is rare that happens. It is very rare. They're not meant to. Because, first of all, say that they're wrong. Say that they tell you, oh yeah, Joe, you're going to die in 3 months. What is 3 months? We're now in April, May, June, July. You're going to die on July 1st or something like that. You'll become a nutcase. You'll become a maniac. You'll become a psychic wreck. Physical wreck. So,
well, doctors kind of do
they really
that,
don't do it. I think I've read one case where somebody, and I've read a lot, believe me, ever since I've been involved since 1970 in psychic phenomena, I've read a lot. I can only remember one case where someone was told and it came true. But most of the time they will not, even though they know it, they will not say it.
But now doctors will do it. They'll tell people, hey, you've got 6 months, 9 months if you're lucky, that kind of thing. Yep. And most of the time, people they have to accept it and grasp it, I guess. So
yeah, but with a psychic, like I said, I know one particular case where one psychic, I remember reading about it. But most psychics I've read about, even though they will get the impression or they will know that the person's going to die, they will not say it. So that's my experience. But like I said, I've read a hell of a lot. And that's what I recommend anybody who's interested in this, read. Because it is a fascinating subject. It's what life is all about. And spend some time doing this. Develop yourself. Improve yourself. Because what is the big thing? We're all going to die. Don't you want to know what's going to happen when we die? Is there something there? And so I say it's important. And people who don't worry about it and say by the day, a month before they get sick, and then they say, oh my God, I'm going to die, I better do something about it. Well, it's a little bit late then.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And you know, I had my incident, my near death. I'll say I didn't have a near death experience, but I had an experience where I was close. I could have died, and with that, you know, and twice actually in my life, I almost drowned once, and both times. It is what it is. People hate to hear that sometimes, but it is what it is. You have no choice but to accept it. It's going to happen, and you know I didn't get scared because I know there's something after. But it still doesn't mean you want to die. You know, you might have things you want to get done. So I say just enjoy and do what you can in this lifetime because you don't want to have any regrets once you're done.
Exactly, but that doesn't mean blow all your money on booze and all the worst things in life. Do something with your money. Doesn't mean you have to give it all to charity. I mean, I don't believe in that either. But there's nothing wrong with enjoying yourself and having a good time, but also help others and care about others, not just yourself. And don't get fixated on the materialism of life. Look, it's so easy to forget the spiritual part of life, and I think nowadays we're all forgetting that. At least most people are forgetting that. They're so attached, like this thing about their smartphones. I just can't. I go to gym twice a week, and what do I see? All these young kids in their 20s. They're just sitting there doing their exercises and sitting there texting away, and they're sitting there on the iPhone reading all their emails. I mean, God, there's something more than those kind of things in life. So, read,
absolutely,
learn. Those are the important things. But, coming back to psychic experiences, with Mickey and Sarah, I mean, they had experiences, and they've taught us all these things. You know that they never charged, ever. They never charged a cent. They never made a lot of money. They were never wealthy. They made a living, and they sold fine furniture, but they never charged a cent for all the sittings they gave.
That means they loved what they were doing, and they were most definitely probably real. I mean,
yeah, they were 100%
I mean,
real.
Or you could get Chloe the psychic, one of those call numbers or whatever the heck it is, and she'll charge you $1.99 a minute and stall you as much as she can.
And what you're getting there is baloney.
Yeah.
So. And there are psychics. And for anybody listening, if there are these psychic fears, there's no harm in going. Don't spend an arm and a leg. For these people who charge, and I know a few psychics myself who charge $200-300 an hour for a sitting. Nothing is worth it.
I know of one who charges $700, and it's just for a half hour. And
yeah, James from Prague does that.
Oh.
I think it's him. I mean, these are the kind of money that, to me, is absurd. There are good psychics out there, who you can meet at a psychic fair for $10 or $15.
Hey, if my deceased loved ones want to contact me, they're gonna have to do it some other way because I'm not taking the collect call. $700? No.
No way. That even $200 or $300. And I know some of them. I know them personally. They're good, but they're not that good.
I might go 40 or 50 for the fun of it and give it, but I'm not willing to lose more than that for somebody who could be feeding me a line. Even if they were proven to be 100% real, I still wouldn't pay that kind of money. It's like, hey, you've got a gift, gift it.
Yeah. Yeah, like I know there's a friend of my daughter who's a very good psychic. She charges $25 for 15 minutes, which I think that's reasonable, and she's actually very good. So, there are people around who like that. The trick is you got to find them, but don't get caught up in these people just because they charge $200 or $300 or $700. That doesn't mean they're good. They can have bad days too. I used to go a lot on business. I had to go to London. I was in the diamond business, and I had to go to London to the beers. And I would go to the Spiritualist Association every time I was there. And every time I was there, I would have a sitting. And there were sittings that were terrible, and you paid them £20. There were sittings that were excellent, £20. But mediums differ. And the reason is that any psychic, and people mustn't forget, you're communicating with the spirit world. It's not like turning the light switch on that you automatically get a good line. It isn't like that. You can have bad sittings and good sittings. Oh yeah, there's one medium I forgot to talk about. Last year in July, I brought out a German medium, and Mugi, his name was Mugi, and he produces ectoplasm in red light. He's one of the very rare current mediums who produces ectoplasm in red light. And we had, 20 sitters? That's all he allows. And the first part of his sittings was like all the other sittings. Everything was dark, black. Everything was blackened out. And the trumpets would flying around the room everywhere. We had objects flying around the room. We had lights. We had people being touched. All the stuff that you typically get in a sitting with a David Thompson or that any of the other famous materialization mediums would have. But during the second part of his sittings, he would turn the red light on, and he would actually have ectoplasm pour from his mouth, and he would stand up and he would actually, with his hands, pull it out, and he was in trance. So he was subconscious, and he was actually pulling it out, and his ectoplasm would pour to the ground. And it poured to the ground, and we saw it there, and I was actually sitting next to him, 2 feet away. So I really saw it very well. And the ectoplasm was on the ground. A hand would rise up out of this ectoplasm. You could see a hand. But that's as much as he could produce. He could produce no full materialization, no arms, but that's all he could produce was the ectoplasm in red light and a hand forming in the ectoplasm. So there are mediums who do this nowadays, but it's rare. And if you ever get a chance to sit with him, his name is Kai Mugi, K-A-I Mugi. He's a German, but he does occasionally sit here in the U.S. David Thompson, he sits in Florida. I will very likely try to get him out to come out again next year. Every 2 years I'm going to try to get him out. And so there are mediums who do it, but it's so rare. And part of the reason is it is so dangerous. Because like I mentioned about Alec Harris, someone jumped on a materialization, the ectoplasm shot back into the medium, and he was he was hurt, and he was never the same again. One famous medium, and I think it was Eileen Garrett, could be wrong, but they jumped on the ectoplasm and she died. So it happens. And that's why materialization mediums are so careful. They're so careful who they invite. Everybody has to hold hands, and if somebody lets go, they have to immediately say, hey, be careful. There's somebody's let go, because they can't afford to have somebody grab the materialization, grab the ectoplasm. And I think there are more materialization mediums around. They just don't advertise it. They probably sit for very small groups, but they don't go around demonstrating and charging money and making a living out of it.
I'll tell you that some people might hear this broadcast tonight, and you might find more of them out there now. They say, "Oh, there's something new we could try to, get a 1-800 number for."
Yeah,
yeah. So
I mean, there are people who have this gift, and it's a gift that's worth developing because it is so rare. But the good you can do with it is so phenomenal that you can really, really help people. But the other trouble is it's so easy to get accused of fraud, like with David Thompson. How anybody with his sittings can say afterwards he's a fraud is nuts. It's just, I get so frustrated. And you see these people saying, he's just got night vision goggles. After he was searched, he sits there in a tracksuit with Kai Mugi, this German guy. I was in the room when he was totally naked. He put on his tracksuit. I walked with him to the seance room, walked with him, put him in a cabinet to make sure that he had nothing on his body. That's the precautions they take. And people still turn around and say, oh, it's all fraud. And I'm sitting to myself, oh my God.
Well,
You know?
and I get that a lot of times when I have guests on. It doesn't happen as much now as it used to because I put a lot of people in their place. But I'd get emails all the time. Oh, this guest is a fraud. This guest is this and this. And I always tell them it always ends with, prove it. If you could prove it to me, then I'll certainly mention it. But you need to show evidence. You need to back it up. Just because you said it, don't make it so. And then of course that's where it would end. They say, oh, well, he's not going to just fall for it. So let me move on to the next guy.
Exactly. I mean, that's the amazing part. It's that people look. If you don't believe it, read, learn, educate yourself before you criticize. And this is why I say to people, buy my book, buy Victor Zamet's book, buy Tom Harrison's book. Read about it. Investigate it. But don't criticize before you've investigated. I've been doing this since 1970. I'm a trained scientist. I've got over 80 scientific publications. I'm not a nutcase, but I've investigated it, and all the evidence points that this is genuine.
Well, you've been doing this. You've been doing this a year longer than I've been alive. So, yeah. So I guess you by now you've had an interest in it this long. You had to have picked up some things along the way.
Absolutely, but there are frauds around. Absolutely, there are good psychics. There are bad psychics. There are fraudulent psychics. There are real psychics. Unfortunately, and there are some. But investigate. Nothing wrong with being a skeptic. There's nothing wrong with being skeptical. But question, but also be reasonable. Don't just say, I don't believe it, so it must be fraud. That's nonsense. If you believe it, if you question it, have a reason, like you said to your guest. If you can prove that they're genuine fraud, do so. Like with David Thompson. I said, well, where are the night vision goggles? We searched the whole room. We searched him. He's sitting there in a tracksuit and his underpants. Where are the night vision goggles? Then they can't give you an answer.
No.
So, it's that kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with being a skeptic. Nothing wrong with... I did that in the beginning. But I met Professor Allen, and he said, Jan, I've been sitting with Mickey Sarah for years. They're genuine. But don't stop questioning. And we would stick our legs out. We would always make sure that there was no hanky-panky. There never was, ever.
And that's one of the reasons I talk about these things so much with people on my show is because I've had my own experiences. So it's not that anybody has to convince me that there's another side or at least another dimension that we are communicating in ways with, but that also goes with the whole extraterrestrial thing. I've had experiences. I've seen these crafts, so I know they're real. Are they ET's craft? I don't know, but prove to me that what they are, so then I don't have to associate it with ET or tell me what I'm seeing. I mean, if someone has a better explanation for the things that I've experienced, I'm all ears, but, back it up.
Exactly. I've never experienced it, but when you look at all the evidence, you say, that looks very interesting and very convincing. But you can't poo-poo it just because you don't believe it. Now, as a physicist, the trick with spacecraft is the speed of light. And this is, remember, as a scientist myself, remember, nothing can go faster than the speed of light. So but they can come very close to it. But there is something called time dilation. That means the faster you go and the closer you get to the speed of light, the more time slows down. So if you are traveling at 0.99% of the speed of light, time will slow down dramatically. So what would take a normal person at our speed, 10 years, might take you seconds or minutes, depending on how close you are to the speed of light. So if some galaxy is light years away, if they can travel somehow near the speed of light without their mass increasing, because that's as a consequence of E is equal to mc squared, the higher your energy, the more faster you go, the more your mass. So if you can overcome that trouble, then what seems like might take centuries for us to travel might take days or months for them. So there is a possibility, but the laws of physics, there are possibilities, but you have to go very close to the speed of light. I don't know if you do that.
But I think what they're doing, it would seem to me from what I've visualized myself, and the way they move and maneuver these crafts, it would seem to me that they have their own gravitational field that they travel within. So, like, I don't know, if there was something in front of it, it would push it out of the way before the craft even got near it. It's like it has its own.
That just means they can overcome gravity,
right.
But that means they can only go at a certain. You can't go faster than the speed of light, so it helps them go closer to the speed of light.
Okay, can't hear you very well. You've drifted off.
That means that they can go close to the speed of light, but they cannot go faster than the speed of light. And I think these anti-gravity things that you talk about, the way they maneuver and move. That probably has some anti-gravity effects, but I think it makes it easier for them to go faster.
Yeah, and I would think that, okay, say they took the big trip at one point, so then they stationed themselves somewhere within the solar system, so now they don't need the speed of light to get here quickly. I mean, because they're close enough where getting close to the speed of light would get them here fast.
Yeah. Remember, you cannot go at the speed of light. You can get very close to the speed of light. But then time slows down.
At least as far as we know right now, right?
At the moment, that is the key law of physics. That, every evidence is, until somebody proves it to me, as a scientist, I still have to say you cannot go faster than the speed of light. But don't forget, time slows. That's what's called time dilation. Time slows down. The faster, the closer you get to the speed of light.
So then it really makes up for the not being able to get to the full speed of light, because if you're slowing down time, then I guess it all works out then.
It does, but it still takes time for them to get here, but time slows down.
Sure.
So it is, like all these things, there are laws involved. That one law, you got to prove to me that can be broken. But other laws, like with ectoplasm, there are things happening here with the spirit world where a spirit entity can take ectoplasm, close themselves in ectoplasm, and then walk around and talk and speak to people and touch people. Oh, by the way, in one of David Thompson's sittings, I asked William, David's main guide who materialized, I said, William, do you have a pulse? He came up to me, took my hand in his hand, took two of my fingers, put them up to his neck, where your carotid is, and he says, here, can you feel my pulse? I could hear a very faint heartbeat there. So these full materializations, how they do that is beyond the laws that we know. We haven't discovered yet, but they can do it. I don't know how they do it, but they can do it. So it's real. I felt it. I've experienced. I've touched it. And for anybody to tell me I was touching David, it is nonsense. So it's real.
Well, Jan, what we're going to do here is take our last break, and that's quite a bit. Apparently not enough because people still complaining. So we do have the app. So you can go and check out the website with the app. So make sure you go ahead and get that. Also, we're waiting on iTunes and some other things. Tune in. Also, we're waiting on them. So we've got some things in the works and other ways that you'll be able to listen as well. But tonight's show will be archived. You'll also hear it on the Dark Matter Radio Network. So, anyways, let's get back to it here with my guest tonight. We've got just a little more time to go here with Jan. And Jan, where would you like to go with this now? I mean, what would you like people to know? I mean, the other side, I'm still curious. What did have people on the other side, spirits on the other side, what have they said about it? I mean, it seems like we never get the full answers. Are they not allowed to tell us exactly? Is there a process? Is there steps? Do we stand in line anywhere? I mean, what happens when we get over there?
Interesting question, and something I've thought about myself, obviously, and I've asked many spirit guides, and there actually are quite a few books. There are about 3 or 4 books that talk about, one of them is called Life in the World Unseen, by Borgia. They talk about exactly, what supposedly happens to the other side. You're never bored. You do what you want to do, but the whole purpose there is to advance yourself spiritually. So if you want to do nothing, you can do that as well, and you can spend a lot of time. But remember, there's no time there, and this brings up this whole question of time, something that's always fascinated me, and that's why when we spoke earlier about time.
So you could be over there so some people might be over there for 1,000 Earth years, and before they come back,
do nothing.
And others may be there for just, a week or 2 and come back?
Yeah, absolutely, and they developed and they advanced themselves. And when you ask about reincarnation, there are those spirit entities that talk about reincarnation, but not sort of in the sense that we generally accept. In other words, you think of the sense of my soul, I die, my soul goes to the spirit world, I reincarnate, my soul goes into another body, years later or weeks later or decades later or centuries later. They say it's not as simple as that. They describe reincarnation more like your soul being a diamond with many facets, and that each facet incarnates at different times. So it's a process where you have to learn different experiences. You might have to learn one facet of the diamond, might have to learn about poverty. One might have to learn about humility. One might have to learn about generosity. All these facets will incarnate at different times. That's what one spirit guide told us. So it's a process. But if you don't want to incarnate, you don't have to. The process is totally up to you. But you can stay on the same spiritual level for eternity in our time, but not in their time. Or you can advance yourself and one guide, a very famous guide called Silver Birch, many books have been written by sayings of Silver Birch. And he talks about it being an infinite process. It's infinite process to develop yourself. It takes an infinite amount of time. So it's continual. You're always busy trying to improve yourself spiritually. So I agree with you. You ask different spirit entities what they do, they all give you different answers, but they all sort of the same thing. You can do what you want, and you can develop yourself if you want. Absolutely.
And our lifetime here on Earth would contribute to our spiritual growth as well, though. And it seems like this is the only plane we're not allowed to say, okay, we like it here, we're going to stay.
No, this is the only plane where you can't decide to stay. But most of us, yes, it will help us. But for some of us, we learn nothing. We come here to learn something, and we learn nothing. We end up being full of hate, which is maybe what they don't want you to do, full of jealousy, which is what they don't want you to do. So it's you got to live your life right, or try to live it right.
But now
it's not easy. It's easier to say than do.
But then those things are things that we can only experience if we're in this human body. At least I hope. I'd hate to be jealous and be on the other side.
Oh no! This is only what you're going to learn in this spiritual body. Yes.
Because I think
and they talk about incarnating to different worlds, different planets. There is life on other planets they talk about, and a lot more evolved. One of the guides once said that our Earth is one of the lowest evolved planets. doesn't tell us much about us, does it?
Well, and I've had some say that the vibration here for this planet has lowered so much that maybe some souls are being trapped here. I don't know. It's not being trapped, but you have to evolve spiritually, not to get attached to it. So we have to learn here. We have to learn. Make this life a worthwhile experience. So it's definitely something here, and we have to do that. So there are books available. Like I said, Life in the World Unseen is one I recollect I've read. There are other books about it. I advise all your listeners, educate yourself, read.
do something about it.
And
this way you learn
and when
what life is all about.
When your time comes, if you don't mind me asking, when your time comes, and I mean, are you going to be afraid at all, or do you feel like you know exactly or pretty much what to expect?
Yeah, I'm not afraid at all. You know what to expect. You know you're going to go to the spirit world. I've had so much evidence and so much proof. For me to now say I don't believe it would be nonsense with all the evidence and proof I've had.
That's true. That's true. And in the early years, I know for myself even, I've questioned things, and then you get, eventually it just gets to a point where you could question all you want, but now you're in denial because you know damn well what happened. And you know
exactly.
What you
see. Exactly. Then you get to the stage of, total, like you said, I think the best word is denial. It's not denial. I mean, I've experienced these things in these sittings recently again with David Thompson having come out here. Tremendous sittings. And one funny, interesting thing about David Thompson sittings, which again, don't ask me how these people try to say it's fraud. David was tied with his hands to the armrest, his feet to the chair, his feet to the legs of the chair. And after the sitting, or just before the end, you would hear a thump. And after the sitting, we turned the red light on, and there David would be sitting, say, 15 feet in front of the cabinet. Bang, all tied up to the chair. There he was. But in one of our seances, and there were 3 each year, he was moved way over the sitters on the other side of the room, past the sitters. Now, you tell me how he did that. If he was supposedly tied to the chair, well, did he get up, walk himself there, tie himself back up? No, they moved him. These spirit entities have the power and the force. They have something that can just move someone like that with no trouble across the room, over people to the other side of the room. Unbelievable. And these are laws of physics we just don't understand. How can they do that? I just don't know.
Exactly, and rather than say it's just impossible or it's an illusion of the mind, I mean, we got to accept that there are these other dimensions, and I think the other side is one of those dimensions. But I guess we would call it the spirit world, but in all sense, it's still yet another dimension, right?
Oh yeah, it's then the spirit world isn't some fancy place like heaven, like some people visualize. It's right around us. This spirit world is right around us.
And so sometimes they interact.
It's just another dimension. You can call it a multi-universe. With different universes. We could be just a layer. The spirit world is just above us, another layer of this whole universe. Mm-hmm. So, exactly, it's we just don't understand it. I mean, to think that our universe is the only thing there, a lot of physicists now say no, they're multiverses. They're an infinite number of universes. So the mind can't even fathom this. We can't understand this. So to say that these things aren't possible, is something you just can't say that. Any scientist who says that, I find, is very narrow-minded, old-fashioned scientist.
Well, yeah, and some of them feel like if they admit that it's possible, then they would admit that they'd have to admit that there's a God and there's such thing as ghosts and things, and they don't want to admit even that there is a spirit world, and not even go as far as say, well, we're interacting with the spirit world, but they won't even admit that, yeah, okay, it's possible you go on somewhere after you die. They say, nope, that's it, you're dead, because they can't measure it, or they can't see it. Well, then it certainly don't exist.
Exactly. But the sad thing is, there is so much literature by brilliant people. Nobel Prize winners in the late 1880s, early 1900s. Nobel Prize winners, famous people. They investigated all of this, and they said without any doubt, this is real. They've give you names. Professor William James, very famous psychologist. Sir Oliver Large got the Nobel Prize in physics. These kind of people investigated psychics in those days. And they said without any doubt, this is genuine, this is real. You get and there's so much literature on this, you get a scientist to read this, they won't read it. They won't believe it.
Oh, they read the first sentence and go, oh, come on.
Oh yeah, spirit world. Oh, forget it.
Yeah, exactly, because they don't want their colleagues to look down on them, and
yeah, think that they're nutcase, like happened to me at the university.
Well,
that's why eventually I had to shut up, because they basically told me if I keep on talking like that, I won't get tenure. And that's the kind of attitude they have at the university. They're not trying to teach you, trying to develop your mind. They've got this system of, this is what you're supposed to believe.
Oh yeah, it's really a form of brainwashing. They want you to memorize what they say is truth, and that's all you're supposed to go away with and teach, because they said it's true. Don't think for yourself.
Instead of questioning it, exactly. And nowadays in the universities, we're back to the same thing, and just even worse. They won't even teach. Some of these courses, they won't even talk. I won't even get into it.
Oh, I know.
But you know what I mean. So it's just sad, because that's why I say to people, read, question, and develop your mind. Don't immediately say no unless you can give a good reason why. Like these people with David Thompson, I asked them, so why do you say it's fraud? Give me a good reason. Explain how he did it. They can't.
Yeah.
There was a magician who read about it. He said, oh, I can do that. I said, I'll give you $10,000. Come right here. I'll give you $10,000. Duplicate it. But if you fail, you give me $10,000.
Yeah.
You think they took me up on it?
Oh, absolutely not. Because
absolutely not.
They tell themselves in their mind, well, I can't do that because I haven't figured out the trick yet. And they got to believe that it's a trick, because, there can't be something out there that they don't understand.
Exactly. Magician's just a hoax anyway. That's all they do, try to fool you.
Yeah.
But if they think they're fooled, they're being fooled, but they can't work it out, so they won't take up the challenge. And the interesting thing is, like with Alec Harris, the medium I mentioned, who produced 20 to 30 materializations an evening.
Yeah.
Many magicians, some of the world's top magicians, sat with him. And afterwards they said he was totally genuine. That Alec Harris was never proven to be a fraud. And what happened when they jumped on his materialization, the ectoplasm shot back into him, and he was, badly injured. So, there are magicians who've admitted. But read the literature. So much literature out there. So for anybody who says, oh, it's nonsense, all I say to them is, you haven't read the literature. You haven't read what's out there. Famous people, intelligent people. Even myself, I'm not an idiot, and I've researched this since 1970. And I've written it in my book, and whatever is there is what I've experienced, what I believe to be genuine, from psychics I believe to be genuine. But it doesn't mean that there are frauds out there. Yes, there are frauds out there. There are charlatans out there. There are psychics who will take your money and give you nothing. Like you see all these palm readers out there for $10 or $15. Don't waste your money. It's a 99% chance most of them are no good.
Yeah,
but there are some good ones, absolutely.
Oh, exactly.
And the trick is to find them. Yes.
And you've got con artists in every business or organization there is. No matter what the topic, you can go into UFOs, you can go into oceans, or even glass makers, and you're always going to have fraud somewhere in everything that you do.
In every walk of life, there are crooks, there are thieves, there are everywhere, every walk of life. So just because there are some fraudulent mediums doesn't mean that all mediums are fraudulent, So, that's the kind of attitude that a lot of people take. It is so sad. Experience it for yourself. There's no harm in spending some money with some psychics. Go see if they give you any good message. Don't expect them to tell you what to do in your life. That's not their purpose. They can give you some guidance, like I was given guidance. Don't take that second car with you. Boy, that was a good advice, but they gave it to me. So they might give you some good advice. And like my daughter's friend, who's a psychic, very good psychic, she's given some incredibly good advice. But they don't do it all the time. They're not accurate all the time. But boy, when they are on 100%. So there are some tremendous psychics, but don't expect them to tell you how to live your life. Remember, you're here to learn, to experience, and like what this famous Silver Birch said, if the sun shines every day and you're happy every day, have you learned anything? Nothing. You have to have the rain, the clouds, the bad weather. You have to experience the bad to appreciate the good. And that to me makes a lot of sense. You don't know what happiness is until you've experienced despair. You don't know what poverty is or what wealth is until you've understood poverty. There are so many things in life that we need to experience, both the good and the bad, and that develops our character, our spirit, our soul, and we become better people.
The yin and the yang.
Exactly, Michael, and that's basically what these guides tell us.
Yeah.
They're not going to tell you which race to bet on what horse and make a fortune, or which lottery numbers to take.
And people say that a lot. Say, "Oh, if you were psychic, why don't you know the lottery numbers?" And look, yeah, that's like, you know how to do heart surgery. You can't do it on yourself, you know.
Yeah, exactly. They're not going to tell you. If you're not meant to, they're not going to tell you. Maybe in rare cases where somebody is such hardship that they need some help, they might do it. But they're not going to tell you. Don't expect to go to a psychic and get all the winning numbers. It's not going to happen.
No, it's not. I think anything good cannot be used for greed in power, and I think that's where that is. That's greed and power. If you know, you've got to take all the bumps and bruises as they come in life. You've got to use them as learning experiences, and you got to understand that every time one door closes, another one opens, until, of course, finally the 3D door will close, and then a major door is open for you, I think, at that point.
Absolutely, and that's what the spirit guides tell us. You read these books like Silver Birch, beautiful books to read. You can get them online. Just to type in Silver Birch, the sayings of Silver Birch, the teachings of Silver Birch, beautiful. Yeah, Silver Birch was an Indian guide who came through a famous British medium in trance, and they got like 6 or 7 different books. They're beautiful to read. It talks about life, the purpose of life, the spirit world, talks about everything. And a lot of it makes sense. To me, it's made tremendous sense.
Absolutely.
And, I think he's one of the better spiritual guides to read. So you can read about all these things. Don't reject it out of hand, and unless you have a very good reason. But like I said, since 1970, what I've experienced with Mickey and Sarah has been phenomenal. The trumpets moving, the entities that spoke through, the little children that touched us, the ectoplasm with David Thompson, the full materializations that have touched us. It's phenomenal. It's real. It's genuine. And if you ever get a chance to sit with a physical medium, even if it costs you $100, $200, $300, it is worth every cent of it.
All right. Well, Jan, we're just about out of time here tonight.
Okay.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to give you the floor, and you get out any information you'd like, books, anything you got you want to plug, appearances. It doesn't matter. Go right ahead.
Okay. Like I said, I think a good start, and I don't like to plug my own book, but buy the book. It's what costs $12 or something. Life After Death, some of the best evidence. Just type it in on Amazon, or you go to your website there, and it's there on the front page. Type in my name, and it'll show you the photographs of what materialization is about, what ectoplasm is about. It'll give you a lot of references, other books to get. Read Victor Sammet's book. Read Tom Harrison's book. Read Silver Birch's books. These books will help you understand what life is all about, that there is life after death, and it'll comfort you. It'll help you. A lot of people are very frightened. They don't want anything to do or know about life after death. They're afraid to even talk about it. There's nothing to be afraid of. Read these books and you'll see it's real. We're all going to die. It's going to happen to us. But read about it, understand about it, and I think you'll make your life a lot better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and I'll keep your link up on our website, on our links page, after tonight, and I thank you so much for taking time out with us, and would love to talk to you again in the near future.
Michael, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Great.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night. Bye-bye. All right, everybody. There he goes, Jan Vandersand, and
spirit world and the physical world. They sort of are a communicating agent between, our world and the spirit world, and they get messages. So we went there were mediums there, and we thought maybe we could get some messages from the mediums or get some insight into if something was there. And we decided in our development circle to see if someone could develop into a medium. So we sat for several months, and one of the sitters sort of developed into a trance medium. I said sort of. And to explain to your listeners, a trance medium is a medium who goes into trance or becomes unconscious, and the spirits speak through him or her, which is very different from most mediums that people are familiar with, who are called channelers or psychics. People like Van Prague or John Edward or the Long Island medium. These are people who are fully conscious and just sort of get impressions or see visions and just tell you what the messages they get from the spirit world, and they tell the person they're giving the message to. Those are more channelers, they're awake, very different from a trance medium who is sort of like unconscious and the spirits speak through them. So after a few months, we had one person developing into a trance medium, but it was very slow. Then one day, my wife and I decided, and now it starts getting interesting, we needed some furniture for our apartment. So across from the university where I was doing my degree was a little pine wood shop where they sold pine furniture. So we went there, we looked around, and we decided on a table with some chairs, and I sat down, and I said to the lady in the shop, I said, boy, these chairs are hard. They'll surely keep us awake in our circles, our development circles where we sat. And she said, oh, she said, do you sit in a circle? And there I thought I was a big shot. I said, oh yeah, we sit once a week in a development circle, and we're trying to develop somebody into a medium. So she said, would you like to come to one of our circles? And my wife and I looked and said, oh, this is getting interesting. So we said to her, of course, we'd love to. She said, okay, next week, Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, this is where we live. Her name was Sarah, and her husband's name was Mickey. So next week, we go there Wednesday night, promptly get there early. We meet them, and there were two other people there. There was a professor of anatomy at the university, Jack Allen, and his wife. Because they'd invited Jack, because they knew that I was studying at the university to do my PhD. So they invited Jack and his wife and two other people. So at 8 o'clock, we went into a room, and it was totally blacked out. There was one window totally blacked out. In the corner, there were two chairs, and there was a black curtain that could be pulled across the corner. So you could only have the two people would sit there in the chair, and you could cover them with a black curtain, which was about 5 feet, and these trumpets flying, where you get materializations, which I can go into some more detail now. That these kind of experiences are totally different, and they're so rare. But I address it in my book. I discuss the best physical mediums. And they basically, all of this started, well, I shouldn't say started, but became better known in the mid-1980s, 1850s, my apology, 1850s, sort of the birth of spiritualism in England and here in the U.S. And when there were more of these physical mediums. Of course, there are a lot of fraudulent ones, and they were exposed, rightfully so. But remember, there's fraud in everything. Even with regular psychics, they're good ones and they're bad ones, and they're fraudulent ones. I mean, it happens everywhere. But when you find a genuine physical medium, and they have been documented, back in the 1850s, someone called Hume, a physical medium who was investigated by numerous people. It was proven beyond any doubt he was genuine. And some of the people who investigated these mediums in those days were very famous scientists or even Nobel Prize winners, because they were interested in the same thing as a scientist, interested in, is there something beyond the laws of physics? Is there something after death? So these people were investigated, these physical mediums. And during the sort of 1850s and 1900, there were quite a few of them. But the more famous ones are in the early 1900s. And there are two of them I can really talk about because they've just been phenomenal. And the reason I know so much about them is is that Mickey and Sarah, the people that we sat with, the mediums we sat with for 8 years, and by the way, the 8 years we sat with them, every time we sat with them, without any doubt, that trumpet, or that megaphone, would rise up and fly around the room. Every single time. Brian would come and talk to us every single time.
So
same voice, never changed.
You would see this with your own eyes.
This is our own eye. Now remember, this was in the dark. These trumpets fly around in the dark, but you can see them because of the luminous paint on these trumpets. Now there are magicians. There's a very famous book about it, and I just forgot the name of the book. There's a magician who claimed, oh yeah, all these trumpets are just phony. The medium would just have a stick with a string, and he would just take this trumpet, and he would just fly it around the room. And my very simple answer to that is, there are two answers. How come this medium, how come this trumpet can be flying around the room, touching people gently on the head, on the knee, and never bump into anything? If it was the medium there sitting with a rod and a string and flying the thing around the room, he would fly into things because he couldn't see. It was pitch dark. Also, these trumpets flew into the corners, near the ground, everywhere, just like a bee did. Also, the second thing is, these trumpets, and we were stunned. After about an hour, the sitting ended, and I went up afterwards to Professor Allen. I said, John, or his name was Jack, like John, Jack, he called himself Jack. I said, Jack, is this for real? He says, absolutely. He has sat with Mickey and Sarah for years. He said, this is genuine, this is not phony, not fraud, this is real. Now, it turns out, my wife and I, Marlene, we became very friendly with Mickey and Sarah. For the next 8 years, we sat with them regularly. In the beginning, every few weeks, later on, every month, and every few months. When they got older, they got into the late 60s. And then eventually we left South Africa to come back to the U.S. That's how my introduction to psychic phenomena, and these are called physical phenomena. These are called, Mickey and Sarah are called physical mediums. Very different from a trance medium or a channeler or a psychic.
No.
They are physical mediums.
No.
They produce these physical phenomena where objects fly around the room, where voices come from different places in the room, using what's called a voice box. They also produce what's called materializations, which I'll get into in a lot more detail. Or they produce apports. These are very rare. Physical mediums probably represent less than 1/100% of the mediums that exist. Anybody who's had the luck to have sat with a physical medium will have experienced something unbelievable. It is still possible today. There are still some physical mediums, but you can probably count them on 2 or 4 hands, and that's about it. They still exist, but to experience that is a life-changing experience. So that's how my wife and I got interested in this. That's how we experienced these phenomena. And from that stage on, I went even deeper into it. We had additional sittings, which I can describe in detail, but that's how we started. And I don't know if you want to stop here for a minute, because I can get into materializations and other direct voice and other phenomena. You might want to ask some questions, or...
Yeah, I did have a question, but you kind of answered it as you went along, and that was going to be about the physical medium. Now, I've not heard of a physical medium before. It's I thought, medium was a medium, I guess, or psychic, rather.
Yeah.
I thought it was all the same, but it's not, huh?
Not at all. The typical medium is the ones you see on TV, the John Edwards, the James von Pragues, the Sylvia Browns, the Long Island medium. These are psychics. Some of them are very good. They give messages, but they're fully conscious, and they just give messages to the person they're giving a message to. Physical mediums produce physical phenomena. This is where you get, in the dark, in front of where they were sitting, a few feet in front of where they were sitting. So we sat around in a semicircle. The door was locked. There was no light anywhere except for a red light bulb, which was turned off. So we were in total darkness. But there was what's called a trumpet. Now, a trumpet is like a megaphone. You know, these girls, these cheerleaders at the basketball games or football games have these big megaphones they speak through.
Yeah.
Well, this is sort of a trumpet that was like 1.5 feet high, which had luminous paint at the bottom and luminous paint at the top. And this was standing about 2 feet in front of the curtain, which was now pulled in front of Mickey and Sarah, who sat in the chairs behind the curtain. So they sat behind the curtain was closed. This trumpet, or this sort of megaphone, sat on the floor in front of them, in front of the curtain, sorry. And the six of us sat in a semicircle just a few feet away from this where they were sitting in the corner. After about 2 or 3 minutes, a voice started speaking, a young voice, a male voice, and he sounded, believe it or not, with an American accent. And he spoke not from sort of behind the curtain, but to the side of the curtain and quite high up. And I'll explain later exactly what that is called.
Okay.
And the voice called himself Brian, and he started speaking to the 2 regular people. Then he spoke to Professor Allen and his wife, and he welcomed them because they were also regulars. And he spoke to us and welcomed us, and he hoped that we would enjoy the sitting and would experience, something different. So he chatted for a while. Then he said, "Okay, let me go." And as soon as he left, about 10 or 15 seconds later, this trumpet or megaphone started moving up and started moving around the room. Now it's totally dark. You of course could see it because it had luminous paint on it. It started moving up to the ceilings, to the corners, came down, would tap you on the head, on the knee, never bumped into anything, and would fly around. Now, of course, my first reaction was, nonsense. This must be Mickey. He got up, and he probably had the thing on a string and was flying it around, but there was no buzzing noise of a string, and the thing was flying very differently. It was flying like a bee all around, very fast, rapidly, and like I said, never bumped into anything in the dark. And eventually it stopped about 6 feet high in front of the sitters, and a voice started speaking through it, a woman's voice in a German accent. And she introduced herself as Maggie, and she started talking to us. And she talked about purpose of life, and I can't even remember what she talked about. We were just stunned, my wife and I. And she spoke for a while, and the trumpet would fly, would eventually come down, again would position itself right in front. And after that, Brian came back and he spoke to us, and my wife and I still don't remember. You really don't remember much, except Brian came, other people spoke. Okay.
Jan, are you with us?
I'm here.
You are here. Well, welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. It is a pleasure to have you. And we are live, by the way. I should probably tell you that. But thank you for taking time out to be with us tonight.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, great. So am I. Now, I guess a good place to start is some background. How you went from the things you used to do to the things you do now. What got you so interested in this topic of the afterlife outside of the fact that we're all going to get there at some point?
Well, it's a long story, but I'll start, and I think it's an interesting story, and I'm sure your listeners would like to hear it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When I was in college, which was back a long time ago, as a student, I was a science student majoring in physics. And as a scientist, you sort of see all the beautiful laws of the universe, but in the meantime you say, is there something else? Because most scientists, unfortunately, take the attitude that once you're dead, and that's it, there's nothing else. And I just couldn't accept that. So as a science student, I started thinking about that. But there weren't many books available back in the 60s. So in 1969, I ended up going to South Africa. Before that, I was a student at Cornell University I did my master's at Cornell. I went to South Africa to do my PhD in physics on diamonds, the right place to go for diamonds. While there, this was around 1970, I met my wife, or future wife, and after met her, after 3 months we were married, chose her, and then we're still married 45 years later, so it does occasionally work out. But she was also very interested in, hey, what happens when we die? So we ended up going to a few spiritualist churches. Now, South Africa is very much like England, where you have a lot of spiritualist churches. In this country, in the U.S., you don't have too many of them. But there, in this South Africa, there were. So we used to go on a Sunday night, used to go to a spiritualist church and see if we could get any messages or get any information that might show us that there is something beyond life. If there is there something after death?
And so, oh no, go ahead.
Oh yeah, it's a long story.
Oh, please go.
But yeah, it gets more interesting. So we did that, and while there, we met some younger people, also our age. We were in our mid-20s, and we decided to form what's called a circle, what's called a development circle. And this is where we had a group of about eight younger people, and we'd meet once a week, same time every night, same time once a week, and we would see if somebody there might develop into a medium. Now remember, just for your listeners, a medium is an intermediary between the